Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Lisa Minerva Luxx. I'm a representative of the Filton24 Defence Committee. Today, it's about a month since 17 of the Filton24 were released from prisons across the UK, following 5 others who had been released 2 weeks prior after a jury failed to convict them of a single charge. The majority of this 17 had been imprisoned for 15 months as terrorist prisoners and are now on restrictive bail conditions. They have still not faced trial. Today, you will hear about the treatment that they experienced, the historic hunger strike, and the events that led to a case which is changing the face of British protest law. You will hear from the following defendants today: Kamran Ahmed, Teuta Hoxha, Heba Muraisi, Maddie Norman, Kessa, as well as Dr Asim Qureshi, who is Research Director at Cage International, specialising in counter-terrorism policy. But first, just a few words from myself on behalf of the Filton24 Defence. To situate us as we sit here at this conference, over 1 million people in Lebanon, which is approximately a seventh of the population, are navigating displacement after a new wave of bombings and evacuation orders by the IOF. Between a quarter and a fifth of the country have now been occupied by the Zionist entity. Thousands are dead, injured, sleep deprived, and psychologically battered. And last week, just as had happened in Gaza 2 years ago, flyers were dropped over the capital city. This time, the flyers spoke of the great success in Gaza, threatening a new reality in Lebanon to Gazify Beirut. The defendants that I'm sat beside, and the ones that we are here to represent, are being accused of trying to stop the brutality spreading this far again and again. These defendants have been vilified by senior members of the Labour Party and used as political pawns, evidenced in the FOIs we received detailing the myriad meetings held between a mix of people who should never have been in a room together, including the Attorney General's office, the British Policing Minister, Home Office representatives, and the Israeli ambassador and the CEO of Israel's largest weapons manufacturer, Elbit Systems, who are the alleged victims in this case. Now, Elbit Systems employees in interviews boast of their great successes in the genocide. They are the central operating system of the IDF, and under the direction of Martin Fawcett, they operate here in Britain. Now, Elbit Systems have been telling the world through their marketing taglines for years that they battle test their weapons on captive populations in Palestine, much as they test and refine their violent methods of occupation as well. So what is happening in Lebanon now, as we all sit here today, should be a sufficient enough reminder that Palestine is just the start of a brutal colonial vision of Greater Israel, which the UK started and the UK continues to reinforce, and the UK continues to demand our compliance. Empowered citizens, however, will not comply. Our generation has changed irrevocably. We changed when we heard the crack in the voice of the Red Crescent volunteer as she read Surat al-Fatiha to Hind Rajab, whose own mouth was filling with blood. We changed. We changed when we witnessed the shreds of Sidra Hassuna's body hanging above the yard she had played in only hours before. We changed. We knew our government was forcing us to be complicit in war crimes, but we had changed. And this is now the age in which British citizens refuse to remain powerless. We are here today because the government tried everything in their power to stop citizens from taking direct action. We are here today because citizens took direct action after they tried everything in their power to stop the government from participating in genocide. After all the democratic routes failed, swathes of people decided to bypass the government and go directly to the source, which was the weapons factories. The Filton24 is the name of a Labour Party witch hunt, which swept up anyone suspected of having some connection to an action in Bristol, and it was meant to be a warning shot sounding out across the nation. And what you're about to hear is the result of a project called Operation Recomply, as it was named by British counter-terrorism. Unfortunately for them, it backfired and popularised direct action. And one day, when people no longer have anything to lose, it will be commonly accepted that stopping the flow of weapons was the only logical thing to do. These are the testimonies of ordinary people who will not be defeated. Whether they themselves were involved in the action or not, they have been pushed to represent an entire age of people who will not comply until Palestine and Lebanon are free.
Today, on the other side of the world, in Gaza, a kid works his way through rubble. He hopes to find some aid or some water. Or in a distant dream, he hopes that he might find his parents alive. Whilst I sit here, he survives there. Whilst I talk here, he silently cries there. And if given the opportunity, he would probably be able to fix a car better than I ever could. And probably with no tools too. But the mystery called destiny has placed him there and me here. People have often asked me, why did I take action against the murderous arms trade that's operating in Britain? It was thoughts, stories, like the one I just mentioned, that would keep me up at night and battle my blanket. I would ask, what if the dice had rolled another face? And what if it selected my brother, or my sister, or my niece to be born in Gaza? and be subject to that same fate? And it's still a question that plagues me today. I think it's quite fitting that I introduce myself. My name is Kamran Ahmed, one of 24 humanitarian activists that was kidnapped by counter-terrorism police. What felt like 30 officers, some with riot shields, raided my house in the early morning of November. It's an odd feeling when time stands still. Sometimes you need it to stand still and sometimes you don't. And this situation was the latter. I heard my dad, the next room over, whimpering in fear as the officers screamed for him to wake up. And for that moment, I wished that my blanket could swallow me. He probably woke up to a scene identical to mine, and I was unable to comfort him or aid him. Once they put the cuffs on me, they moved me to downstairs in front of the room to my in front of the door to my living room. They left that door open for me to freeze to minus temperatures from morning to afternoon. And the dehumanization didn't stop there, because in one specific incident, when my mom asked the officer before she was about to take her medication, she needs to have food, and could she get something from her kitchen? The lead investigator replied that go to the local takeaway. A takeaway 15 minutes away from my home. And now not all disabilities are visible. But my stair lift in my house was. You expect my mum to walk 15 minutes when she cannot climb even 13 steps? We were being dehumanized. By the afternoon, I became property of what I describe as an extension of the Zionist war machine. In custody again, they used the element of freezing temperatures to demotivate me. The cells were empty, and later I found out that my next door neighbors were Teuta Hoxha and Kessa, who were also subject to freezing temperatures in their cells. Whilst my interview room was warm, our cells were freezing. A strategy perhaps to make us lose hope, but I was still hopeful. Which leads me to fast forward to a specific event that hasn't been discussed in the media. That a year ago from today, I was granted bail by an experienced counter-terrorism judge, and that judgment was immediately overturned. That judge was removed off of any further proceedings going forward. And if there ever was a wink wink, nudge nudge moment, then that would be it. I was stuck. The police state was in full action and the political mafia was rotten to the core. A lot of things happened in between then which I could write a chapter about, but I want to address a more serious and current issue. One of my comrades and fellow hunger strikers from the Bryce Norton 5 has currently lost feelings in his legs. When I last spoke to him a week ago, he was using a Zimmer frame. The prison cannot manage his condition or provide adequate health care. I won't speak on his behalf, but it seems like they are waiting for him to die. A feeling all us hunger strikers know very too well. Whilst I was on hunger strike, a nurse told me one morning that she believes I won't wake up the next. My blood sugars dropped to below 3, and my response was that if Allah wills that to happen, then Allah willed that to happen. Whilst the government played ping pong with our lives and laughed in Parliament, or the incredibly concerning moment when David Lammy, the Justice Secretary, was unaware that a hunger strike was going on in UK soil, said to my sister's face, "What hunger strikers?" Even though he received multiple letters. It seems they never know when it comes to people dying. And like so, they hope that we would all die. We are not humans, I guess, just numbers. And that became quite clear during my hospitalization, when I was forced to walk back to prison in socks. When I had to use the public toilet with only socks, I had to dodge stains of urine and feces. Or when I was chained to a guard to take my shower whilst I was in hospital. I was chained so tight that even today, I still bear the marks of the cuffs. Officers had no explanation for this apart from that it was a top-down decision. And one officer, when I returned to prison, said, "Where's his shoes?" I relate this snippet from my hunger strike to show how we felt every avenue was exhausted, legally and socially, to challenge the biases of our case and our treatment, and also to stop the genocide going on abroad. That being dehumanized in this fashion or dying as a byproduct of the government's inability to grant us our rights, or simply arming a genocide, was completely worthwhile. That still suffering with chest pains and shortness of breath was worthwhile. I hope that perhaps we allowed one more kid in Gaza to smile for one more day. The dice did not roll one more face, perhaps because I could never cope with their reality. But I'll try to do what my brother and sister used to request of me, and to become someone of use in society. Free, free, free Palestine.
Thank you, Kamran. That was really emotional. And before we start, I'd like for you to be mindful that my mind isn't as strong as it used to be. It's not as sharp as it was before the hunger strikes. And I think that's the case for a lot of us on this table. My name is T. I'm one of the Filton24, and I have spent 15 months in prison without trial. On November 19th, 2024, alongside 10 others, I was arrested during an early morning raid by counter-terrorism. This was after they had already smashed their way into a previous address. I hadn't lived there for over 7 months. In the counter-terrorism suite, the interviewing officer broached me. "Guess what we found in your home," he said. "What?" I asked, confused that this conversation was happening in the corridor without the presence of my lawyer. "The Palestine flag." I didn't understand this ridiculous and absurd interaction until I got to prison. I witnessed guards threaten other prisoners with 14 years for saying "Free Palestine." When I raised this incident with the prison's regional counter-terror lead, a meeting I secured through the hunger strike, he used the analogy of a neo-Nazi fascist symbol to compare the two. Prisoners were warned not to associate with us because we were deemed to be terrorists. Any associations were noted in security reports, which can affect a prisoner's quality of existence on the inside, their chance of parole and job clearance. Kafirs at HMP Bronzefield were confiscated under the pretext that they were, quote, clothing of a terrorist organization. Photos of children in Gaza were denied to me on security grounds. Here they are in a sealed bag. The Filton24 case shows that what is being criminalized is any engagement with the Palestinian identity. What is being legalized and protected is the production of illegal weapons by Elbit systems used to vaporize Palestinians out of existence. This is not metaphorical, this is literal. They are the ones who should be on trial. I had been in prison for 8 months when Palestine Action was prescribed, at which point prison treatment got harsher. This included removal from recreational activities and jobs, ban on books, and mail censorship. I received a different post procedure from the other prisoners, which omitted my right to have mail from a third-party supplier photocopied. I was removed from my library job and placed on wing cleaning. Due to these retrospective punishments and lack of responses to my complaints, I began my first hunger strike. I did not eat for 28 days. James Timpson, Minister of Prisons, parroted the following statement to the press. "We are very experienced at dealing with hunger strikes. The processes we have are well established and they work very well." The prison failed to open a food refusal log within 72 hours of my announcement, contravening their own policy, which requires them to identify and understand the reasons behind such refusals. Instead, subject access requests show they willfully went about trying to find excuses not to acknowledge or log the hunger strike, thereby breaking their duty of care towards me and ignoring my medical needs. I was not seen by a nurse until day 8 of my hunger strike. My medical notes show that it was the public pressure and call-ins that prompted the healthcare team to request confirmation from the prison's operational team about the strike. If these prisons are so experienced at dealing with the yearly average of 200 hunger strikes, then why couldn't they even manage the basics? And why were we all subject to negligent and degrading treatment? On day 19, I finally received photocopies of my mail, and soon after, a letter confirming prescription of Palestine Action as the factor for these repressions, a ban which has been ruled unlawful by the High Court. I joined my comrades in a second hunger strike. I did not eat for 2 months. I prepared an advanced directive listing names of people I wanted by my bedside in the event of death. During this hunger strike, I lost 20% of my body weight and was defecating my muscle mass in hospital whilst chained to an officer like a dog. This hunger strike peeled back the layers of cruelty this government is capable of against its own citizens in order to protect its foreign genocidal project. They were willing to let us die for a ban that was later proved to be unlawful, and for bail we eventually secured. For the political parasites who live off colonialization and plundering the dignity of others, our hunger is a language they could never understand. Whilst they made profit from their squalid cowardice, we turned our incarcerated bodies into an act of solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters. We partook in a tradition of resistance practiced by them as they face systematic abuse in Zionist cages, including rapes by bestiality, and now the impending death penalty targeted only at Palestinians. Dr Hussam Abu Safia, like many thousands of others, has been held in administrative detention by the terrorist state. The nature of prescription was a means to protect the Israeli arms trade during a genocide and limit our ability to a fair trial. For this ban to come into force, we were violently arrested by counter-terrorism, held without trial for up to 18 months. Ministers like David Lammy and James Timpson were willing to let us die on hunger strike, and nearly 3,000 people have been arrested under counter-terrorism powers for holding up placards. So we say to Shabana Mahmood, enough damage has been done. The ban is unlawful and the appeal must be withdrawn. The prescription is a preview of what we are to expect in the future from this government towards dissidents, particularly those showing solidarity with Palestine. But not even these threats can undo the awakening we've had, nor the love for our Palestinian siblings, a love rooted so very, very deeply inside each of us. The British state failed to disappear our resistance, nor will they ever be able to. Long live Palestine.
For the first time in human history, we've witnessed and continue to witness a genocide unfold live on our screens, perpetrated by the illegitimate terrorist Zionist state, who are aided and shown unconditional support by spineless imperial powers. In the months leading up to my arrest, I've bared witness to all forms of brutality. Human bodies crushed, torn up, gutted, burnt, and severed. I've seen children's remains in plastic bags. I've seen entire neighborhoods turned to rubble. Churches, mosques, schools, and hospitals reduced to nothing. And in the midst of all this terror, my family are somewhere there in Gaza, subjected to torment and misery. I have not heard from them in 27 months. Wars far from home, yet hitting home, have always brought a difficult, invisible, second-hand trauma that only some will share with me. Their tyrannical rampage may be waged oceans away, yet the arteries that keep their barbarity beating lie here with us. It is right here where these predatory institutions thrive by reaping the benefits from the blood of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, crafting the weapons of their torment, mass-producing their destruction, and manufacturing their extinction. And because I dared to rewrite their demise, because I dared to take matters into my own hands, because I dared to care, the state unleashed its full force of corruption and had the audacity of accusing me of the very crimes I hold them accountable for. I was subjected to a violent pre-dawn raid where dogs of the state, hiding behind balaclavas, used chainsaws to rip through my door and tear me away from my family. I was dragged barefoot into the streets with my hands cuffed behind my back. And before throwing me into the back of a van, they violated my dignity by exposing my body on the streets in the presence of a man. This was just the start of what became 15 months of state repression and abuse. HMP Brunsfield targeted, humiliated, and psychologically tormented me daily. I was confined to my cell regularly. I had falsified reports written about me, and I faced continuous punishment despite not breaking any rules. They categorized my co-defendants and I as dangerous, telling other prisoners that we are a threat just to further alienate us, actively segregated us, and even went as far as changing the entire prison regime just to ensure that our paths would never cross. Once the unlawful prescription came in place, it only got worse. On one occasion, I was violently cuffed and dragged across the prison by 6 guards. I had my head shoved into my stomach and had the wind knocked out of me. My body was then thrown into solitary confinement, with a guard pushing my face to the floor and aggressively pulling my restrained arms into an unbearable position. To further humiliate me, they took away my kufiya and refused to give me a headscarf, so I had to use a pillowcase to cover my hair when praying. 11 months later, and I was forcibly ripped away from my family once again and transferred miles away to a different hellhole. They refused to tell me where I was going, and I spent 2 days in the back of a van not knowing where I may end up. I ended up in HMP Newhall in Wakefield, so far away from London that my mother, who was unwell, was unable to visit me for almost 5 months. At Newhall, the repression and abuse continued. Blocked mail, rejected phone numbers, denied visitors list. It was at this point I had decided to start my hunger strike, which lasted 73 days. It was clear from the outset, HMP Newhall lacked the essential equipment needed to sustain and monitor my physical health. I wasn't given any electrolytes and only received vitamins after over 30 days on hunger strike. I was eventually taken to a hospital for refeeding. There I was cuffed to a male guard, where they tried to force me to change out of my clothes, meaning I'd have to strip while cuffed to him, vulnerable and exposed, waiting for this male guard to hand me clothes to wear. There was a second guard there who was female, who should have been cuffed to me, but refused to swap with the male guard. Due to their treatment of me in hospital, I was forced to stop my refeeding early and return to the prison against medical advice. This is nothing in comparison to the thousands of unlawfully detained Palestinians who are routinely imprisoned from the age of 14 onwards. They face relentless torture, rape, including by dogs and other objects. Despite all this, they remain steadfast and resilient. It's their courage that's inspired me and enabled me to face the abuse of the British state. My family in Gaza are enduring a genocide, and I don't know anything about their well-being. I haven't heard from them in 27 months. This is not the first time my family have survived a genocide. My uncle survived the Sabra Shatila massacre in Lebanon, which was declared a genocide by the UN. It is off the back of their stories that I was raised upon that meant I had a responsibility to take action for Palestine. Long live the resistance.
My name is Maddie Norman, and I spent 18 months in prison as one of the Filton24. On the 13th of August 2024, 4 plainclothes police officers arrested me as I was out with my friend walking her dog in Edinburgh, where I lived. They told me I was being detained under the Terrorism Act 2000 and took me to a local police station where I was held incommunicado overnight. The following day, I was transported in cuffs by 4 officers to Newbury Police Station, an 8-hour drive away, with no indication of where I was being taken or why. I was held in Newbury for 2 days and interrogated day and night for hours at a time by counter-terrorist police. I was still not permitted to make a call to let anyone know where I was. On the 16th of August, 6 men in balaclavas and shades took me from my cell and blue lighted me to Westminster Magistrates Court in a convoy of 3 jeeps. In court, I was denied bail, then transferred to HMP Bronzefield, where it was another 14 days before I was able to make my first phone call and tell my mum where I was. I learnt that my flat had been violently raided, and so had my parents' home in Cumbria. It was several weeks more before I was permitted visitors. One morning, early on in my incarceration, 2 officers came to my cell and informed me that I was being placed on the escape list. I was forced to undress and put on a yellow and blue tracksuit, then they removed all the other clothes from my cell. From that point on, every evening I had to request prison-issued pyjamas and hand over the escape suit, and every morning I had to make the swap in reverse. This went on for 2 months, during which time the suit was rarely washed. I was regularly denied my medication because this was issued at a set time each morning, and I would miss the window if no officer would bring me the suit. The worst aspect of being e-listed was my phone being disabled. I was told that if I wanted to place a call, I would have to make a request to security so that they could listen in. But in reality, they were rarely able or willing to accommodate this. When I was allowed, the phone would be abruptly and arbitrarily hung up mid-conversation. What helped me remain steadfast during that period was the knowledge that nothing I had experienced
or would experience was even a drop in the ocean compared to the unfathomable suffering endured by Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. The videos and pictures I had seen and testimonies I had heard of the systematic use of sadistic sexualized violence, rape and torture by Israeli prison guards galvanized my resistance and anchored me in the cause for every minute of my detention. In total, I spent 567 days on unconvicted remand, so legally innocent, and never for 1 second of that time was I permitted to feel like an ordinary inmate. It was clear that I was being subjected to unusually harsh and repressive treatment because of the media hype around our case, and this only intensified after the prescription of Palestine Action. I was transferred around the prison estate multiple times to isolate me from my comrades, and was put back on the escape list on 2 further occasions in 2 different jails, each time under some new outlandish pretext. When I first arrived at HMP Low Newton, everyone on my wing was made to undergo training on how to spot and report on radicalisation, and I was interrogated by Prevent about the nature of our case. Posters were confiscated from my cell for extremism that simply read, "Bombing kids is not self-defence," and "Free Palestine." I was penalised for the most risibly minute infractions and deemed too high risk for any of the jobs I requested, resulting in minimal time out of my cell. It was assumed that if any other inmate held or expressed pro-Palestinian beliefs, then they must have been groomed or manipulated by me, and they were warned by their offender managers not to spend time in my company or be found in my cell. My treatment made more sense once I'd made a subject access request to the Ministry of Justice and was able to access my PNOMIS, or prisoner information file. Though it was heavily redacted, there were repeated references throughout to my offence, as if I had already been convicted, and it was often described as terrorism, terrorist, or extremist. What is so striking about the outrageously heavy-handed treatment of the Filton24 is how markedly different it has been to my previous experiences of taking direct action against Israel's largest weapons manufacturer, Elbit Systems. Elbit produces 85% of the killer drones and land-based military apparatus of the IOF, along with munitions and components for all Israeli attack aircrafts, and it has several sites here in this country. I first took action against them in July 2022, and I was arrested and held overnight in the cells, then released on bail. The consequences were as I had expected, proportionate, at least according to our genocidal state's corporate profit-protecting imperatives. I was arrested a further 3 times between that first action and August 2024, all for the same sort of activism, and there was never any suggestion that my actions fell beyond the scope of property damage, still less that they warranted the involvement of counter-terrorist forces. What differed this time was not the scope or nature of the activism, but the way in which it has been policed and prosecuted. The government's unprecedentedly draconian response is political theatre, designed to discourage others from taking action and to justify the unlawful prescription of Palestine Action. It starkly lays bare just exactly what the state exists for, and whose lives and liberties it considers disposable. In weaponising counter-terrorist legislation to silence and criminalise pro-Palestinian activism, all the government has succeeded in proving is that the fight for a liberated Palestine is inseparable from the fight against state repression. When I reflect on the word extremist that has been used against us, I think about the extremism of the British government in continuing to export weapons and surveillance technology to a highly militarised apartheid state that has been committing genocide in Palestine for 2.5 years now, and is now extending its campaign of terror to Lebanon and Iran, while our mainstream British media daily manufacture consent for its massacres. However, if this is the word that's going to be invoked to condemn us, then I'm proud to be extremely committed to the total liberation of Palestine, because how else should one commit oneself to justice? In spite of the state's best efforts at smearing and repressing us, we are here before you unbroken and undeterred, and more assured than ever that there isn't a boot in this whole world big enough to crush the resistance. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
My name is Kessa. This is my prison suit, And I wear this today to remind myself and remind us all that our prisoners, we are one body. This is the same suit that Palestinian prisoners wear, and there is a huge body of prisoners yet to liberate. I was 19 when I was kidnapped from my home in the middle of the night by counter-terrorism police in a very violent raid. I was awake finishing 2 university assignments that were due that day, but I never got to submit them. I was detained for 4 days incommunicado and then banished to the prison HMP Bronzefield that I would only walk out of 15 months later, now at age 21, still untried in court, still not convicted of a single crime. This is what the state has done. We are the consequence, the collateral damage of its immoral allegiance to the Israeli state. It stopped a life from carrying on, and this is what it perpetuates in Palestine. I am not the only student who didn't get to go back to uni, but millions in Gaza face this and a worse fate. The purpose of oppression is to humiliate, to force people into lives that are utterly inhumane through the complete theft of their dignity, and hopefully to break their spirits and their hopes. This is the purpose of the Zionist occupation of Palestine. This is the purpose of the now regional genocide. This is the purpose of the imprisonment and unspeakable torture of Palestinians in Zionist jails. And this was the purpose of our imprisonment: to try and strangle our commitment to the Palestinian cause out of us. The dignity of the human being is in their freedom, their autonomy, and their principles. We were forced into cells that had no space for our principles, for our struggle larger than life itself. For the entirety of my imprisonment, I was subject to a calculated regime of isolation, blocked from making any friends, especially other young people and Muslims. One Muslim woman I met was locked into the laundry room with a guard who told her that there are dangerous people here and that she needs to be moved away from me. It was an induction landing with mostly everyone on remand, innocent until proven guilty. I was subject to multiple periods of prolonged confinement and isolation in my cell without reason. I remember telling a friend during one of these periods that I was starting to feel like a ghost of myself because I could barely smile anymore. In the 8th month of my imprisonment, I found out in my cell that my little brother, Salam Mahmoud, had been arrested in connection to the same action and would now be condemned to the same fate as me. This British government had now stolen 2 children from their disabled mother, instead of listening to its citizens and stop arming and abetting a genocide. To be unable to protect my little brother, which is the unspoken promise of a big sister, was an assault on my dignity as their big sister. They kept up this assault in every visit with my 13 and 14-year-old little brothers. In one visit, my little brother sat slouched in the chair too big for him, and a guard came up to him, bent down to his ear and whispered to him, "If you don't sit properly, we'll ban you from visiting your sister," to a 13-year-old boy in his first visit with his big sister in prison. One day, after 2 prisoners had died in the prison in a week, I begged the guards to unlock a severely claustrophobic and suicidal prisoner. They responded by assaulting me. 2 male guards grabbed my arms, exposed my body, dragged me through the landing and up a metal staircase and threw me into my cell against the metal bed frame. After locking me in, the same guard, SPCO Balraj Dillon, said to all the prisoners who had just witnessed that, "If any of you try to be heroes, this is what we'll do to you." They wanted to make an example out of me just like this government does. I hated having to pick up the phone to tell my loved ones what happened because I would start crying. And I hated that the prison could listen to that. But what could I do? I was hurt. The second time they assaulted me, even more violently using military tactics, was for crying. That's all. The guards made sure I never forgot the threat of violence. They talked to me only by shouting, boots running, sleeves rolling, and body cams turning on. The constant threat became so intense that I remember feeling like I was caught in the crossfire and nowhere was safe. And all I wanted to do was collapse and hide, and then I thought about Gaza and how the crossfire wasn't a threat, but very real missiles, very real death all the time. And I wondered how they survived the unsafety of it all. But if they didn't give up, how could we? Our prisons mistreated us in the most elaborate ways in order to teach us prisoners that our bodies don't belong to us. They are under the command of locks and keys. But our hunger strike faced them with the fact that their entire structure of ownership and control was a farce, because they could not even get a single morsel of food into my mouth for 48 days. I watched their tantrums as they saw their power evaporate. They accused me of eating and then tried to tempt me with food secretly. And then when nothing worked, they resorted to the most cruel of tactics. For the first 20 days of my hunger strike, they denied me electrolytes completely. And then on day 42, after I had collapsed the day before, they suddenly decreased my electrolyte dose and then gave me none. They orchestrated my rapid deterioration. Instead of killing me, they wanted to push me to the point of death to scare me into stopping. They wanted to make it clear that they would go this far. And so, on the 45th and 46th days of my hunger strike, they left me paralyzed from muscle wastage on my cell floor for 22 hours and refused to call an ambulance. Now they left my cell door open during lockup time, knowing it meant nothing because I was confined in my own body. The guards took turns staring at me, watching and waiting for either my soul to leave my body or my dignity to collapse and for me to end my hunger strike. They shoved my arms and legs to take vitals and then refused to tell me the readings, keeping me in the dark to my own state. They left me to die on my cell floor, or at least let me believe that they would. This was one of the scariest and hardest moments of my life, and I tried to hold onto my dignity in the face of their humiliation. I did not break, and with the help of Allah and public pressure, I was finally hospitalized. They do not see us as human. The humiliation was unending. As I laid in my hospital bed, my 20-year-old body recovering from 48 days of starvation, a guard I was chained to rubbed her thighs and said, "I miss using force." To that, her male colleague replied, "Ah, Anushka misses using force." He then turned to me, chained and hooked to an IV drip, and said, "Kessa, act up so Anushka can use force." But this is why resistance to injustice itself is the victory. Because it declares, in the face of all the humiliation and subjugation, that we will not forsake our cause, nor our principles or our self-determination. We declared this with our hunger strike. We learnt this lesson directly from our beloved Palestinian people, living under occupation, subjugation, confinement and torture, who teach us that the dignity of the human being isn't in the body that the oppressors assault, but is in the spirit that we will never let them reach. We resist because we have to. We cannot remain subjugated, repressed and suffocated. And thanks to Allah, we won back more than just our dignity. We won our freedom. And here we stand today, steadfast, as custodians of this most just Palestinian cause, with a bond forged through struggle and sacrifice. While we have all recited today incomplete testimonies of our pain, we do not count our losses, because whatever we have endured pales in comparison to our beloved people in Palestine and now in Lebanon and Iran, as the UK, USA and the Zionist state wage a regional genocide. All that we have sacrificed in the way of justice, we would, with utmost conviction, give it up many times over, fida mukawim, for the resistance. Because if you kill one innocent soul, it is as if you have killed all of humanity. But if you save one innocent soul, it is as if you have saved all of humanity.
First of all, my sincere thanks to T, Kamran, Maddie, Heba and Kessa. For some of us, public speaking is something that we've been trained to do many times over. Been on courses, you know, even somebody as law background myself, you're kind of taught these skills on how to kind of convey your messages to people publicly. These guys have never been through that process. Everything that you heard today from them purely comes from pain that they were forced to suffer at the hands of a government and a system of incarceration that, as all of them mentioned, specifically seeks to dehumanize them. It is constructed that way. And it's important that we understand and remind ourselves that remand custody is a liminal space of criminality. It is not an apolitical space. That the remand, as it was used, especially with the Filton24, was used specifically as a form of persecution and as a form of punishment, which of course it is not supposed to be. It is not the function of remand to punish you before you have had your trial. And yet, that's exactly how it was specifically constructed in every single element of their detention, from the moment they were raided, to the police interviews, to being transported to and from prisons, from inside the prison experience itself, then for those 6 who had their first trial, to being denied even being given food while they were on trial throughout an entire day's worth of waiting. There are so many elements to the ways in which the Filton24 were persecuted throughout their prison experience that actually right now we just simply do not have the time and the space to quantify it all. But it is important for us to acknowledge that it was happening, and that it was happening on a minute-by-minute basis throughout their detention experience. What we're talking about is a system of prisons, some of which are government-run prisons, but also private prisons, like the ones that are run by Sodexo. Sodexo, a company that runs HMP Bronzefield, where Kessa was held. Her prison charges the government around £66,000 a year per prisoner. It's an astronomical figure. And what you have with that, of course, is cost efficiencies at all points. So the dehumanization process happens for a start from the prison itself, because it wants to reduce its cost burden as much as it possibly can, which inevitably means that they do not get the help that they need at any given point. But there is a more nefarious element to this, which is that the prison operates ideologically as an extension of the counter-terrorism regime of the government itself. That is the most important part of this. And nothing brought that home more for me than when T went on her first hunger strike. You had many of us calling into the prison on a regular basis, asking for updates, trying to push the prison to give her rights. We're not asking for anything that was unreasonable at all. All we were asking the prison to do was to treat her in the way that she has every right under their own standard operating procedures to treat her. And yet, when one well-wisher rang up the prison in order to give T the assistance that she needed, the receptionist, we're talking about the receptionist here, right, answered the phone and started laughing at this well-wisher. This was near the end of her hunger strike, where her body had already been through a great deal of damage already. Started laughing and said, well, if she doesn't want to be, if she wants to have her rights and if she wants all of these things back, why did she attack an RAF base? It's not even what T was accused of. But you can see how that criminalization process feeds into every single element of the imprisonment experience, because it's ideological, because the prison takes on itself this role of punisher before and beyond what it is even permitted to do. And so when we're talking about their experience, their entire prison experience, but the hunger strike experience in particular, we have to understand that they were being systemically punished by these prisons. It wasn't just simply a case that this was just something that happened out of the blue, or it was just some individual actors here and there. And counter-terrorism is what sits at the heart of this case. And I want to quote to you something from Jordan Devlin, one of the Filton24. He's got this really incredible line, which I really think brings home to us how ridiculous it is to use terrorism as a guiding framework for all of this. He says that terrorists make bombs to destroy lives, not destroy bombs to save lives. And in that is encapsulated exactly what this whole thing is about. That you want to use counter-terrorism legislation against a group of people who understood what the entirety of the international law community was calling a genocide, what the entirety of the experts on genocide were calling a genocide, and understood that a higher legal obligation, a higher moral obligation, extends to destroying the weapons that are leaving our shores to go and kill Palestinians. And so you end up in this situation where they have to explain the difficulties of their experiences. You have somebody like Umer Khalid from the Brize Norton 5, who was one of the longest amongst the group to go on hunger strike, for 12 days held in a hospital incommunicado, where the hospital was not giving any updates to either his lawyers or his family, something that goes completely against their own procedures. Again, it is a form of punishment. This is not an accident that these things are happening. At all stages, they were being punished. And of course, we can connect this to the wider movement, because what we've seen is close to 3,000 arrests and many more pending of individuals who have understood that what this group did, and what many others have done in the past, and what many others will continue to do through direct action, is not the thing that should be criminalized. And they are putting themselves between counter-terrorism legislation and the desire of this government to completely criminalize direct action. And I think one of the messages then today is that they can continue to try, but direct action is here to stay, and that there will be continually more imprisonments, and there will be more and more people who are putting themselves between counter-terrorism legislation and this government, until this government relents and understands that the genocide is the problem here. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go to questions, I just want to make one final comment, which is, as I mentioned earlier, there were meetings that were happening between the private sector representatives, CEO of Elbit Systems, Thales, weapons manufacturer as well as a policing minister, as well as representatives from the Attorney General's office. Now, in a meeting that was held in 2023, which was, the objective was to reassure the private sector that it was taking Palestine Action's, let's say, effectiveness seriously. Documentation reads, Palestine Action does not meet the threshold for prescription, as they do not commit, participate in, prepare for, promote, encourage, or otherwise be concerned with acts of terrorism. So we know the private sector was requesting for the state to look into whether this movement, whether the activists who participated in it could be tried under terrorism, and found it to not be possible with the laws that were in place. So what happens then, only less than a year later, is this test case rolls out, where they start to try and use terrorism powers, I'd say somewhat at a slant, right? Arresting them under counter-terrorism powers, as Asim says, to be able to use punishment, the process, as the punishment. They couldn't use counter-terrorism legislation because it just doesn't fit the bill. Evidenced in the fact that the prescription of Palestine Action has also been overthrown as unlawful. None of these defendants are being tried under any terrorism charges. None of them. They're being tried for criminal damage. These are their charges. Criminal damage, violent disorder, that's been dropped for a number of them now. And it was aggravated burglary, which has now been dropped across all 24 defendants. And then we have Samuel Corner, who's got the extra charge of GBH, which I'll address in a moment. None of these are terrorism charges. They have just used terrorism powers. And we have to ask ourselves why and to what effect. Now, the CPS has insinuated again and again that this prosecutional overreach is justified because of isolated incidents of alleged violence, which any defendant has yet, after 20 months, to be found guilty of. What we do know, to be clear, from the way that this has unravelled and the prescription case itself, is that this was always about property damage, the private sector, and the losses to the arms trade during the genocide. We know that. Now, Samuel Corner is the one defendant who still remains imprisoned. Sam is in the exact same legal position as all other 23. He has no convictions. Yet he's the sole defendant that Judge Johnson refused to grant bail. And I put to you whether we have to ask ourselves at this point if this is an attempt by the courts to cling to their narrative when the case is so rapidly falling apart. And if this framing that we have offered you today isn't what is reported on today, believe me, it will be in the future. So some of the defendants will take questions, not all of them will. So we'll go to questions now, and then afterwards you can approach. Naila, if you could just wave. If you want to do an interview and haven't yet put yourself down for one, please just do ask Naila, and we can see to arrange that for you. But for now, are there any questions? Yes, I'll start here.
Hi, Kamran mentioned that he's suffered from chest pains and shortage of breath. I just wondered if any of the other people who are on a hunger strike, you know, whether they had any kind of lasting effects, and if they'd be willing to kind of share them, to talk about it.
Do you want to ask? Do you want to answer? No. You don't. Do you want to speak?
Yes, sure. So, of course, I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf because I think everyone's story should be told individually. But what I do know, and of course, what I do know about those who are on hunger strike with me, I'll try to say as accurately as possible. So I think Teuta Hoxha is suffering with a lot of brain fog. She doesn't speak as articulate as she says she did before, and she mentioned that at the start of her testimony. I know that other people from the Bryce and Norton case are suffering with neurological issues. For legal reasons, I can't mention why. Mention who they are specifically. But I think the main takeaway is that all of us are suffering with trauma from the hunger strike. Everyone who went through the hunger strike was dehumanized. There was medical negligence that took place. And I think that's the main thing that you can take away from that hunger strike rather than the lasting effects. We all knew there would be repercussions from the hunger strike. It's not for us to sit here and throw our toys out the pram that happened. But it's to show that the government was willing to let everyone die on that hunger strike, and they were waiting for us to, of course, not be here with you guys today, actually, to tell that story.
Thank you. And I'd just like to note the reason why not all defendants are available to do questions is very much because of that. People are affected, are having memory loss, are struggling to articulate themselves, and that's why they're not available to even speak any further right now. We as a community are trying to ensure they have access to doctors and nutritionists and the right support, but because they went through this whilst also being denied medical care, there's a lot of recuperation that has to happen, and hopefully we see them start to rebuild their health soon, and they will be able to talk about this a little bit more. Thank you. Next question, if you can just say the platform that you're speaking from as well. Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions. Okay. So there's one from Maddie. Was there a reason you were given for being deemed an escape risk?
Yeah. Well. Oh yeah. Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, they came up with a new reason every time. On one occasion, they just referred obliquely to intel and wouldn't divulge what that meant. The first occasion, they said it was because I had been seen drawing pictures of the prison. And, you know, I'd bought a sketch pad from the prison canteen, and I was an artist. I was studying art in Edinburgh at the time of my arrest, so it was normal for me to be drawing. The fact was I was banged up in my cell over 22 hours a day. I still haven't been approved to access the library. There's only so much of the chase you can watch, you know, so I was drawing a lot of the time, not covertly, openly, like on the yard and stuff. I'd be like just sketching my mates and that, and Screws would come over and be like, oh, let's see your drawing today, how's it going? And then one day they said, drawing pictures of the prison, that's prohibited. And I actually naively thought, oh my gosh, there's been a miscommunication here. You know, this isn't strategic repressive hostility, this is just a misunderstanding. And I volunteered my sketchbook. I said, please look through it, you can see that these are not, you know, detailed technical drawings of the prison's layout, they are sketches. There was my little feet in the foreground as I was drawing, you know, the beds, and the Screw tore out all the pages and confiscated them and told me to strip, and that was it. No further conversation.
This is a question to all of you. Were any of you told you were formally categorised as TACT or terrorist prisoners? Formally, in writing?
Does anybody want to answer that specifically? I can answer for you if you want.
If you could answer.
Yeah, sure. So I believe.
I don't think there were.
Well, I don't think. I think that the issue came up when you were getting it through individually through methods like you did, didn't you, T? Where you were told that you're being categorised as terrorist prisoners without ever actually formally being categorised as terrorist prisoners. So if I'm not mistaken, but I'm sure they can jump in because they each had different experiences. So what happened is there wasn't one overall measure that was used across all of the prisoners. It seemed to be coming in a really arbitrary manner across the different prisons. So while some were receiving some forms of documentation saying that they were being held as high risk, at first it was that they were being held as high risk prisoners. Others were then receiving it when they requested books, were being told that they can't receive those books because they're terrorist prisoners. There was never anything actually formal. And I think this comes back to my point that it was so difficult to formally categorise them as terrorist prisoners that what happened once again was that the process was the punishment. And it was the letters that they were receiving when they were trying to make complaints about their treatment. And the letters that would return would tell them that it was due to terrorism restrictions, rather than them ever having a clear answer to how they were being held and what to expect.
There's another element to this which relates to the sentencing guidelines that we have in the UK now. It's actually been brought over from America. So in America, you have the federal sentencing guidelines for terrorism, where you can have a non-terrorist case But after conviction takes place, the judge can apply what's known as a terrorism enhancer to increase the length of the sentence, where the judge himself deems that there is a terrorism connection. So there's no accusation of terrorism. So that's been brought over here now as well, and that's what's been applied in the Filton case as well, where actually the prosecution don't have to make a case of terrorism. The judge can arbitrarily determine for himself, once conviction takes place, that he wants to increase the length of the sentence because he deems that there is a terrorism element involved, which is why the whole kind of amorphous accusations of terrorism, extremism are so serious in these cases, because of the potentiality for that sentencing.
And it was also one of the reasons that was often given for their extended period of detention despite not facing trial.
So I think what's important to remember is that we were arrested by counter-terrorism. And with a lot of tact offenders that I spoke to inside prison, those who are not charged with an actual terrorism offence wouldn't be labelled as a tact offender, but you'll be labelled as a high-risk prisoner.
Okay.
So anyone that was arrested on tact and charged with a tact offence, they would be labelled as a tact prisoner. But those who are yet to still face a charge under tact, you're just deemed a high-risk prisoner. So they were using the same measures that they would do on a tact offender to us. A lot of us were put onto high-risk wings. I know Maddie was, for me, I was put onto a gang violence reduction wing, where majority of my time was about 40, I would say 70% of my first few weeks there, I was held, I wasn't allowed out my cell, so I would go 3 days without leaving my cell sometimes. When I would leave my cell, a kid is trying to stab someone over a cigarette or something, a contraband, that comes into jail. So these were the measures they used, and this is how they viewed us as people coming from the case that we did.
Can I add to that as well? Please, yeah. So I think for me the only formal categorization I received was when I got removed from my library job, and so I was told by different officers that we were under JEXU, which is the Joint Extremism Unit, which from my understanding comes under the TACT branch.
Yeah.
And so what that means is every month, if not more frequently, they would have multidisciplinary meetings where every facet of our life in prison would be controlled by them. And so the reason why I was removed from the library job was because it was raised in these MDM meetings, and JEXU responded by saying, well, she shouldn't have been in the library job. And when I eventually met the regional counter-terrorism lead, and I asked him, like, you know, what is the reason for me being removed from the library job? His response was, because you have access to a lot of prisoners. And I said, what's wrong with that? He goes, because of the views you hold. And I said, please, I'm very curious to know, what views do I allegedly hold? And he said, you belong to an organisation, meaning Palestine Action, to which I corrected him, reminding him that I was on remand and I had not been charged with membership or belonging to any group. He then went on to try and gather intelligence by asking what my response or reaction was to the prescription, and I reminded him that these conversations should be had in the presence of a lawyer, of my lawyer. So finally, by day, I believe 26 or 28, I managed to get the reason for me being removed from the library job in writing, which was because we were part of, quote unquote, PA, a terrorist organisation, and being monitored under JEXU. And when I looked at my subject access requests and the emails, the reason why it took so long for me to get that letter was because they were debating internally on whether to give me that letter. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't want to take much more time, but it seems like like each of you have this verbally and some in writing. referring to you as being terrorist or high risk. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Crispin, Flintoff show. It's live streamed this conference. I just want you to know that people are sending lots of messages. Please tell them we love, appreciate and admire them. The courage of the Filton24 has done so much to strengthen the resistance. Thank you for your bravery. I can't read them all out. I'd be here longer than you are here. But there are questions about a lot of anger about whether there's any damages that could be claimed for the treatment that you received, because it just seems over the top or beyond belief, really.
What I can say for now is that the defendants are currently working with their lawyers and are seeking to take legal action against the prisons for their medical neglect. And this is something that you'll hear more about soon, but it is something that is in the works. It's about the medical, it's about their bodies, you meant?
Yeah.
The damage? Yeah. So we can say, we can reveal that now, that legal action is due to take place. Yeah. Did you want to add anything to it?
I just wanted to wave at the live stream.
Oh, yeah. You're an angel.
Say hello.
Wonderful. Thank you, Crispin. Was there any other questions that you had from there?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions from the room? Yeah.
From Navarre Media.
Hey.
I'm wondering, what communication has there been with the government, the Home Secretary and the PM, and has it been satisfactory?
I guess, the question that I would ask in response is, in what facet do you mean? So, for example, when it came to the hunger strike, I wrote a letter to the Ministry of Justice and sent it off tracked, and it has been received. So, on my end, I'm, made sure to cover all bases, that there could be no way for the government, for David Lammy and the Minister of Prisons to refute that we hadn't sought all avenues to contact them and make them aware. Also, in both the hunger strikes, I would, make a poster outlining my demands, and I'd put it on the outside of my cell. With the first hunger strike, that poster was removed and I was placed on report. So I was sent to adjudication, which is basically prison court where you have to plead guilty or not guilty. And with the second hunger strike, again, that poster was taken down, photocopied, and the ministers and the Ministry of Justice were very much aware of our conditions and the hunger strikes.
There's a question that's come from online. I wonder if you could just switch places, just so that you're speaking into the mic, because this one's for you, T. Just about the complaints, following on from Navarra's question there, about your actual interaction with the prison and complaints that were submitted to the prison, and whether or not you felt that you got anywhere with that.
Yeah, so, I was nicknamed by the other prisoners as the complaints queen. So I exhausted every single avenue, reaching out to the prison. As you can see here, these are actually all my complaints. So I made sure to bring them. So I exhausted every avenue, even to the point where I would take and keep hold of the post procedures that would come with every letter that we received. And I would highlight the post procedures element that they were contravening, and I would analyze it, and then I would send that to security, or I would show security in person. Most of my complaints were unanswered, and they took a very egotistical stance in not dignifying prisoners with a response, because that is part of the control. You have to remember, in a prison system, every element of your life is controlled, from your communication, from your association, from your medication, from your pain relief. You know, there were moments where we would still be locked up and the guards would shout, last call medication, knowing that everyone was locked up, just to provoke people, you know, and to antagonize people. So I'm lucky, you know, in a way, because I had the skills before entering prison to be able to navigate the complaints procedure. But most of the prisoners, you know, the complaints procedure is not accessible to most of the prisoners there. And a lot of the times, you know, myself and the others, we would write the complaints for the others, make sure to hold them to the receipts, and their complaints were very, very, very rarely answered, even though within the complaints policy framework, they have to reply, from my understanding, within 14 days. And I think the difference between us and other prisoners is because we had the pressure and support from the outside to call in and push and make the prisons somewhat hold some accountability, because there would be some kind of reckoning on the outside. And we were very lucky in that regard, whereas the other prisoners suffered immensely without that support system.
Any more questions?
Just to touch on were we satisfied with the government's response? I think by December, when we were on hunger strike for about 30-40 days, they were laughing in Parliament. So to answer it simply, we're not. I don't think any of us here will say that we're satisfied with the government's response at all. David Lammy pretended like he didn't know what was going on, and I think by that time Heba was hospitalized, Kessa was also hospitalized, and they honestly did play ping pong with their lives. So.
Yeah, and they were willing to meet with representatives of Elbit, but not representatives of their own British citizens. Their response to the hunger strike was disgusting and distressing and downright evil. And for the Minister of Prisons to go on TV and parrot a prepared statement, it was very infuriating, you know, to hear about from inside the prison walls, because you know exactly what the treatment is like, and how, you know, as I mentioned in my speech, the basic needs weren't even met. When I did my first hunger strike, and I announced it, one of the prison officers, you know, came to me and said, you know, they're going to let you die. There's, you know, opposite your cell was a woman who, after 2 months, you could smell iron in her room because her body was eating itself. And that's really, you know, the consequence of prisoners who did not have the support system. And I guess our treatment with a support system only sheds light on what the treatment would be like for the prisoners without anyone to intercede on their behalf.
Yeah, Channel 4 News. I'd like to pick up on your point, if I may, about this shocking way that the judge alone is the person that can. I've been trying to puzzle that out for weeks. Who actually officially institutes that strange clause, which is called terrorist aspect, I think, which is not, as you say, the charges are criminal charges. So have there been any cases where that's been challenged before? But you know, has a judge ever been challenged? Have there been any successful challenges against judges laying that on?
I don't know if it's been used yet. I think this may be the first time that I'm hearing of it actually being. It's called a terrorist connection.
Terrorist connection.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's right.
Aspect, yeah.
So yeah, I'm not familiar with its having been used anywhere else, which in itself is of course extremely interesting.
Yeah. No, because I couldn't find any.
And really speaks to, you know, the role of the government in relation to Elbit systems here.
Yes.
And I think that's what we have to keep on bringing everything back to, which is, you know, all of these meetings that senior officials have been regularly having with Elbit systems, with the Israeli embassy. Why are these meetings been taking place? How have they gone from this position, as Luxx mentioned, that they are acknowledging privately that this cannot be construed as terrorism, and yet then manufacturing a situation where, for example, JEXU, Prevent, you know, they use Prevent with Ellie, they used it with T, they used it with so many others as well inside the prison. They're using kind of the amorphous nature of extremism, Prevent, and terrorism to punish them, but without ever having to go down the route of, you know, formally using tax legislation, which of course doesn't fit at all. So that's the whole point about this being punishment before there's even any conviction taking place, and really where there is no actual act of terrorism involved at all. So I think that's really where we need some accountability in this entire process.
Just to add, this is the first time it's been used for protest.
Right.
Yeah, the first time it's been used for protest. And the other thing to add there is that the jury don't get to decide, and the jury don't know.
That was going to be my follow-up
Right.
question. Are the jury aware that that's... So it's kind of in the judge's head. That's the strangest thing I've ever heard.
Exactly that.
It's not. So it's not come from CPS, from the Attorney General. It's not come from the government. It's something that the judge, in theory,
The judge
is deciding on their own. I think that's really scary.
The judge makes the final decision on whether to use the terrorism link to affect sentencing.
Right.
The jury are kept in the dark about that.
That's bizarre.
So a jury could convict a group of activists, a group of people, let's say, I'm going to speak about this more broadly as a mechanism,
Right.
and they could convict them thinking this will be criminal damage sentence, this will be 4 years or so, maybe I can make this, in my mind, I can find this reasonable. A jury could decide.
Yeah.
What a jury won't know is how many years that adds on, and how that affects the conditions under which the prisoner would be in, conditions for parole, or whether they would never get that. A jury are kept in the dark about that completely. So it's a really nefarious, dirty trick.
It's a very dirty trick.
Very dirty trick, yeah. Any more questions? Otherwise we'll wrap up and then go to just a one-on-one interviews.
Just want to thank you all, basically.
Oh, yeah, they're amazing. Let's give them a round of applause.
So, can I just ask you all stand together?
Sure, I'll let them stand together and yeah.